I think it was obvious after running an insurance agency for 10 or 15 years that the traditional thinking of how to be successful, especially for, what I would consider my or most agencies to be, was really hard to figure out. And so the prevailing thinking was you need to go out and get better people. You needed to have all this to have this level of success, and it just became hard to manage, especially for a small business with small margin trying to be successful in a very big marketplace. And I saw the movie Moneyball, and it really related well to kind of what insurance agencies are going through. I think the fundamental logic or thinking about how insurance scales correctly is off, and it's perfectly displayed in that movie, because in the movie of Moneyball, there was the prevailing thought of baseball is you need to go out and pay the most for the best talent, right? And so there's this arms race to have the best producer in an agency or the best CSR, the best carrier, and it's like, well, how do we get there? Because unless we all have a blank check and like the Yankees and can just pay everybody, we've got to figure out how to do it better. And I love that movie because it broke it down. You're not overpaying for players. You're buying wins. And in order to buy wins, you got to generate runs. And it became a very easy formula to think about how, with very little, by breaking things down, you could create scaled success. And so in the movie, they go through this process of finding the most important data, which was runs, and then rather than focusing on the talent or the free agent or the noise around that, they focused on the people who could do the thing. And they started to assemble this group of players to generate the runs. And they believed that once they had the runs, they would get the wins. And if you get the wins, then you get to the show. And I have to say, it's the exact same thing in insurance agencies. It's not how big we are, So rather than focusing on the big stuff that you can't control and the market that you can't play in, it's about figuring out how to get the wins. And what is the data you need? What is the data point you have to get the wins? Agencies are not buying size. They're buying margins. They're buying profit. They're buying EBITDA, the things necessary to be successful. And so their runs are not people. Their runs are what their people do. Because that's really what an agency is. It's a transaction that's replicated profitably or not profitably thousands of times a month, tens of thousands of times a year. And so understanding the transaction and engineering in a way that each one is profitable, feels good to the customer, and makes margin for the agency or the team is really the smart way to think about it. And without a transaction, the ability to analyze what's happening and engineer it in a way that's good for the customer and good for the people and good for the business, well, then it's just everyone doing what they want to do. So breaking down the things we do into transactions, that really becomes our runs. And the more profitable, margin-focused transactions we produce, the more wins we get. And the more wins an agency get, the more successful they'll be. And yeah, that'll add up to premium. But what drops out of premium that way is profit. And people refer to agents as, they refer to them as agents. And I think of them as business owners. So just like in the movie, I'm sitting there and I finally understand how to generate wins. I got to generate these runs. To me, they're transactions. And then you look in the marketplace and you're like, okay, I'll just go get some insurance transactions. And lo and behold, which is the story of my life, they didn't exist. And so I started to think about like, okay, how do I replicate these things? How do I automate these things? How do I make them a center of profit? And I just looked very simply at my own agency and just said, what do we do? Well, we have service transactions. There's got to be a finite number of those. And we have these sales transactions, right? And so it was really easy to start thinking about like, okay, if I can automate these things, if I can identify what they are, the 17 to 20 things that a service professional does, and make that a product where I can measure it, and the 4 or 5 types of sales that an insurance agent might make, well, that's pretty easy to automate and turn those into processes that are measurable. All of a sudden, it was like looking at the scorecard for the first time. It was like, okay, my people do 20 things 15,000 times a year. And if I just build to those 15 things, now I can work with them and the technology to make this transaction profitable, to make it feel better for the customer, measurable. So now we can have the right conversation about it. And all of a sudden, I figured out how to create runs. The problem is there was no software out there that could take those things and move it. And that's really what Neon became. Neon becomes the terminal by which stuff moves, moving back and forth between the customer, moving to other people inside the agency, to the carriers that needed to support it. And so Neon's really a terminal by which those transactions come and go. They're measured, they're quantified. And now, since we know that we can make money off them, we can figure out how to make them more profitable, better for customers, move more freely between the industry. And all of a sudden, we're not tied to two soup cans on a string. Now we really have, when my team takes the field with Neon, it looks like it's ready for the show. And that's the value of the transaction. That's the value of Neon. It's the things we do that make us money. And if we can figure out how to make each of those profitable and then rinse and repeat, and if we have a system that can make us track those things, make them move back and forth between customers and agents and carriers, well, now you have a system that really makes it happen. And that's what Neon is. It's the terminal. It's the thing that powers your people so that they can be successful. And because you know what a win is, it becomes very easy as a strategic thinker to figure out how to generate wins. And wins certainly add up in baseball, and they definitely add up in insurance.